had nothing to do with it. And interestingly enough, as soon as I praised the parliamentary staff, the electronic devil cut out what I was saying. But nothing that has happened so far, Mr. Speaker, has taken away my congratulations to the Parliament staff for the excellent job. Mr. Speaker, as is customary after the budget statement is read, the Leader of the Opposition is required to respond to the Minister of Finance and the government in the context of their proposals as advanced. On this occasion, Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence to direct my response solely to you and the wider public of Trinidad and Tobago, whose business has been so trivialized by the group of 29, which is leading us over a cliff whilst pretending it's a trip to the promised land. It is my intention to leave the government to continue to ascribe blame to others, to evade its own responsibility, to hide and misrepresent facts, to propagandize and engage in self-praise as the national crisis looms larger and larger. In the words of the Minister of Finance himself, this is the only government which finds itself approaching a cliff and chooses to look up with resolve and vision. Maybe it is their intention that the inevitable loud thud at the bottom of the pit will wake them up to the reality of our deteriorating circumstances. But by then, Mr. Speaker, it may be too late for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It's against this background, Mr. Speaker, that I choose to speak directly to the people of Trinidad and Tobago about the real threatening circumstances which the Minister of Finance has studiously evaded. 1 year ago, Mr. Speaker, a new government presented a budget to this Parliament, and something unusual happened. This government received the support of the opposition in the passage of that budget. Even though we were critical of a few of the issues and strongly warned against the negative potential of some actions, we voted for the budget and wished the 5-month-old government well as it embarked upon the business of improving the condition of the people of Trinidad and Tobago on a foundation built by its predecessor, and that predecessor was the PNM. It has come to pass that all that the Minister of Finance can claim as an accomplishment in this budget statement is that he stabilized the economy. It behoves me to remind you, Mr. Speaker, of the state of the economy as it was when this government took office. This is best summed up in a press release from the reputable Standard & Poor's rating service, which issued in New York this statement on September 14, 2009. At that time, this so-called peace partnership was not even formed. And I quote, Mr. Speaker, Standard & Poor's rating services said today that it affirmed its A to A- foreign currency and A+ to A- local currency credit ratings on the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Standard & Poor's also said that it removed these ratings from Credit Watch, where they were placed on February 3, 2009, with negative implications. The outlook is stable, unquote. The budget speech delivered by the Finance Minister was an elaborate exercise in obfuscation, self-praise, and deceit. At times, the speech bordered on delusional or was of such extreme vagueness that one had to struggle to follow exactly what the Minister of Finance was really saying. The Minister of Finance has presented budget estimates of 54 billion, the largest in the country's history. This is without identifying any clear revenue-generating activities other than increasing fines for certain offences. The Minister is actually congratulating himself for planning to run huge budget deficits without articulating any plan as to how he will raise revenue in the future and when he will return to a balanced budget. The disastrous outcome of this should be clear to all right-thinking people in Trinidad and Tobago. There's a saying on Wall Street, Mr. Speaker, that if you're jumping out of a building 100 stories high, for the first 99 floors, you can really believe that you're flying. I think that's what the Minister of Finance is doing. This is the perfect metaphor for what this UNC government is doing to our economy. They are leading us down a path to economic ruin while believing their hollow rhetoric about, and if I quote them, from steady foundation to economic transformation. Who are they trying to fool, Mr. Speaker? What foundation did they lay? The Minister of Finance said by the first quarter of 2011, and let me quote him, by the first quarter of 2011, and I quote, we envisioned a somewhat smooth sailing with a certain gentle economic wind on our backs, unquote. Well, in that quarter, growth turned out to be 1.7% decline. And in the previous quarter, it was a decline of 3.5%. So what was he talking about? Furthermore, after painting a gloomy picture of the developments in the United States and Europe, the Minister of Finance then tries to pretend that somehow these were responsible for the recession that he was presiding over. Listen to him again, Mr. Speaker. And I quote him, "These uncertainties were transmitted to our economy through the impact on oil and gas prices," unquote. Well, the average oil and gas price was well above the budget price of last year, to the extent that greater than expected revenue was derived from the energy sector. This even allowed them to run a smaller deficit than was planned. In fact, the central bank reported, and this was in June 2011, as the energy markets picked up in 2011, and I'm quoting the central bank here, the energy commodity price index increased by 42.4% on a year-on-year basis. That's June 2011, after peaking in April 2011. The average price of crude petroleum, West Texas Intermediate, peaked at $113 a barrel in April 2011, before falling back slightly to $96.3 per barrel in June 2011. Let me remind the Minister of Finance that his budgeted price last fiscal year was $65. So don't come and tell us about any oil price affecting your performance. You got more than you budgeted for. Fact. If that is not deceit, Mr. Speaker, you tell me what is. More importantly, what was the real state of our economy when this government came into office? The fact is that all macroeconomic indicators were very good when this gang of 29 took office in 2022. And I want to repeat that, Mr. Speaker, for those who care to listen. When this gang of 29 came into office, all our macroeconomic indices were strong.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition, I think it's very unparliamentary to describe members of Parliament as a gang. I think that is unparliamentary, and I would ask you to withdraw that and do not go down that path, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when this crew of 29, this motley crew of 29, when they took over the country, notwithstanding what they had to say, our macroeconomic indices were strong. Unemployment was at 4.8% at that time, one of the lowest in the CARICOM. Our foreign reserves and foreign exchange were over $9 billion when this crew took over in May 24th. There was also already $3 billion in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. So they met the country with a combined 12 billion US in savings and reserve. Fact. Mr. Speaker, that is what the PNM left in office, notwithstanding what they had to say. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, on the matter of the public debt to GDP ratio, that was 38.5%. It was way below panic point, notwithstanding what the Minister of Finance had to say on his way into his job, that the country was in a debt trap. It was 38.5%. Yes. It was one of the lowest to be found anywhere in the world. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the Minister of Finance taking credit for preserving our A rating, that's what it was. In 2005, Standard & Poor's, our ratings were A-. 2006, A-, all the way to 29, A-. We moved from A- to A- to A. It had nothing to do with him. And in Moody's, we had moved from Baa2 to Baa1. It had nothing to do with him. Yet, incredibly, Mr. Speaker, they set about bad-mouthing the country's economic situation and in the process destroyed the very business confidence that they are now struggling to revive. We warned them about what they were doing, yet they kept on crying wolf, playing cheap politics, trying to convince the country that we were on the brink of some sort of economic calamity when they came into office. Mr. Speaker, the real disaster started on May 24th. And the Minister of Finance seems to be blissfully unaware of that because he didn't even seem to know what he was reading. But let me read for you, Mr. Speaker, what he has approved in this budget for the Attorney General's office. An office that had, when they came into office, an allocation of $33 million for lawyer work. Fees. An allocation of $33 million. And we queried that. They came back to the Parliament, Mr. Speaker, mid-year, and got an additional $8 million for the Attorney General. So the budget documents will show that last fiscal year, this rampage of the Attorney General had a $41 million to pay lawyers. You know what they budget for this year, Mr. Speaker? $94.5 million.
What? Say it again.
The Minister of Finance has budgeted for the Attorney General to spend $94 million on external lawyers.
Scandalous.
And let me break it down for you, Mr. Speaker.
Scandalous.
Let me break it down for you. $50 million for forensic investigation.
Shame.
And I want the people of Trinidad and Tobago to listen. Yes. The Minister of Finance has budgeted $50 million for the Attorney General to spend on forensic investigation.
What? My God. Only could buy beds.
He has budgeted.
Beds.
He has budgeted an additional. Mr. Speaker, please.
I will appeal to both sides. I am appealing to both sides, particularly those persons who are nearest the leader of the opposition. So to allow him to speak in silence, please. And my colleague, the members on the other side, I will ask you to simply listen in silence. You may continue, Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I hope you keep a little note of the. Thank you. Yes, let me start over. Because I don't want this to be lost in the mirth, Mr. Speaker. We're moving from 33 million when they arrived on the scene to 41 million mid-year to budget now for 94.5 million, of which 50 billion, 50 million is for forensic investigation. An additional 33 million, for foreign and local lawyers, and 8.5 million for an unknown activity called other, and 3 million for expenses for overseas consuls and witnesses. 94.5 million. Mr. Speaker, this is the only area of growth in the government, over 100% increase. So all indications are that the rest of the year Apparently, he's disowning it, Mr. Speaker. I knew that the minister